Hello, my name is Duke Walker. I serve as the chaplain to the beloved people of Lanier Village Estates in the North Georgia Mountains. It's a joy to be with you today to reflect a little bit on our faith and spirituality. A few months ago, Nevin, our son, as we continue our lessons from Nevin devotions in 2023, he had a terrible period of crying one evening, and it went for about 4 hours. There was nothing we could do. We called a friend of my wife's who's a pediatrician in Boston, and their consult was not able to help us. We eventually got him to the doctor the next day. However, that night, nothing could console little Nevi until I came to my wit's end and I just started to weep. And I started weeping over Nevi. And as the tears began to flow down my face, his spirit began to settle. And his tears began to slow. And his crying eventually stopped. It was still kind of at a whimper, but by that time my wife had gone to get a bottle, and we gave him the bottle, and eventually he settled down where he could go back to sleep. It was an extraordinary moment, and in that moment I began to reflect on the compassion of God that we see in Jesus Christ on the cross. And the book of Hebrews tells us that we do not have a high priest who is unable to identify with our weakness, but was tempted in every way, yet did not sin. Paul goes even further in his letter to the Corinthians, his second letter, 5:21. He says, "He made him who knew no sin to be sin, that you and I might become the righteousness of God." And then in John, the golden text of the Bible, kind of like the golden text of the Hebrew Bible, Deuteronomy 6:4, John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that whosoever would believe would not perish but have eternal life." These passages all speak to the reality that God is experiencing our suffering and our sin with us in our flesh on his cross. There is an ultimate solidarity that God takes on with those who know their own sin and weakness. This is what the picture behind me reflects for me. It's a modern icon, if you will, of the old rugged cross. Those are beach shells that you see from Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, all broken with their jagged edges, incomplete. I scooped them up out of the beach. And you know, if you hold them there for a little bit and let the water wash in there, the sand comes out and just the shells there are left. And as I continued to play with holding these shells, I began to see my hands, those are my hands, turn into the shape of a heart. And in that moment, I realized that's what the cross is all about. The cross is about God experiencing our pride, our gluttony, our covetousness, our lustfulness, our greed, our unkind words, our jealousies, even our weaknesses, our sickness, our physical limitations, that when those are placed in the hands of God, eventually we begin to feel God's love for us more than the weight of our sin and weakness. And that's when we begin to experience the joy of God's salvation. May you be encouraged this day to let him hold you, your sin, and your weakness, and experience again the joy of your salvation.